Hello and welcome back to the Toffee Blues YouTube channel, your source for all things Everton. My name is Thomas, back on the channel today with a bit of a scout report, bit of a player preview for quite a late signing in the summer window. It was kind of rumoured for quite a while. I'm sure we all had our suspicions that Rafa might link up with another former player. Very late on the deadline day, Salomon Rondon joined from China. He'd gone out there to join Benitez when he moved out to China. A bit later on, of course, Benitez ended his contract. He's at Everton now, so is Rondon too. Joined a bit of a trend as well with the likes of Andros Townsend coming back to work under Rafa Benitez. Clearly that, while the club has been slightly strapped for cash this year, because of the financial restrictions, that Rafa's gone back to the players he knows. Not the most, overwhelming signings, not the big names that we had last year. But nonetheless, I'm joined today by Richard Pike. He's a football writer at Outside of the Boot. He's going to tell us a bit more about Rondon after the time that he spent in Russia. Obviously, when he went out to China, it wasn't all, he didn't just spend his entire time there. He ended up going on loan. So, and also you have to excuse us, Richard's having a couple of technical difficulties, so his camera won't be on today. But Richard, thank you very much for joining me. How are you doing today?
Pleasure, Thomas. Yeah, I'm a writer for Outside of the Boot, also write for Russian Football News, Breaking the Lines. Yeah, a couple of number of sites. I'm all very well today, thank you. Yeah, very well, thank you.
Fantastic. It's great to have you on. So we'll start off really, because obviously Premier League fans, they probably feel like they know Rondon quite well. Had time at Newcastle, spent time at West Brom as well. So of course that was a few years ago, but he then did move to China to link up with Rafa Benitez. But in between then, obviously he moved to Russia. So if we could just start kind of like, how did that move really end up coming about? So was it after Rafa had left? Was it while Rafa was still there? Was it to get football? What was the kind of background before his move to Russia?
I think it was just after Rafa Benitez left. I can't remember the exact date, but the background of his move to CSKA was he arrived on loan at CSKA until the end of the 2020-2021 season. Obviously, Russian football has a long winter break. It starts kind of in the early to mid-December and goes all the way through to the end of February. He joined right at the end of the winter break on loan at CSKA Moscow until the end of the 2020-2021 season from Dalian Pro in the Chinese Super League. At the time of the transfer, actually, CSKA were actually in a strong position domestically. They were lying second place in the Russian Premier League table, just 4 points behind leaders Zenit. And he was signed. Rondon was signed due to the relatively disappointing form of striker Fyodor Chelov, who, until the signing of Rondon, had been enduring an overall underwhelming season. And Rondon's signing, in essence, was basically a concerted push by CSKA to try and win the league. They identified that Zenit were not as strong as in past seasons, and the whole idea of signing Rondon was, he would hit the ground running from the off, and his goals would fire CSKA to the title. He had a previously good spell in Russia, previously with both Rubin Kazan and Zenit, before joining West Brom and then impressing in the Premier League. So that was the idea behind the transfer of Rondon to CSKA.
Yeah, thank you very much. So, it seems like Rafa went. He clearly went to China to work under Benitez. Of course, there's the financial gain as well that players do get from moving to the Chinese league. Something didn't quite work out. Maybe there was something going on in China. Moved to Russia on loan. Kind of launched that title push. And you mentioned obviously that was the idea behind the move. So how did that end up materializing then? Did he end up kind of finding the form that he had found in the Premier League in the past under Benitez and end up winning the title in the end, or what was the situation there?
When 10 appearances on loan at CSKA in the second half of the 2020-21 Russian Premier League season, Rondon scored 4 goals and noted 2 assists for CSKA. Despite the acquisition of Rondon to really add a goal-scoring threat to a potential CSKA title challenge, the club actually failed to build on its title challenging position post-Christmas, and they eventually slipped to a disappointing 6th place finish in the end. And this was a final position which actually saw CSKA miss out on European qualification for the first time since 2001. It's a really it turned out to be not such a good season after all. It must be stressed that despite this slump at the end of the season from CSKA, it would be wrong to attribute this to Rondon. He certainly didn't let CSKA down during his brief time at the club. CSKA are a club at the minute going through a period of transition. They failed to miss European football for the first time since 2001. The last 3 seasons when playing in Europe, they've been very disappointing. kind of like Russian clubs in general, really, of the
Mm.
last few years. Also in the dugout at CSKA, there's been a lot of turbulence too. Like the manager of CSKA who brought him for his loan spell at the start was Belarusian Viktor Goncharenko. Now, after only 3 games that Rondon played for the club, Goncharenko was sacked and then replaced by former CSKA striker and Croatian international Ivica Olic. But despite the change of manager, Olic was also not a success in charge, and it didn't do anything to help CSKA's fortunes. Rondon did actually make a decent start to his CSKA career. I was reading earlier today that he was actually voted the Player of the Month for March 2001. So 2021, sorry, March 2021. God, going back in time there. And to me, he started off quite well, but it was when Goncharenko was replaced by Olic that I got the impression that Rondon wasn't really utilised in the best possible way he could have been by the Red Blues. That's CSKA's nickname. In one game, match day 25 out of 30, it was in one round. That was a 2-0 home victory over Rostov Volgograd for CSKA. It was a perfect example of how I didn't think he was really utilised correctly. He did score in this game. He played 77 minutes and scored in the 70th minute. It was CSKA's second goal. But he wasn't getting as many touches of the ball or as much service as one would expect from a striker in a division's top team playing against a comparative minnow. That's obviously what Rostov Volgograd were. And often throughout this match, in Olic's second and in Olic's spell in charge after he replaced Goncharenko, it seemed there was a lot of short probing passes in around the penalty box from CSKA's attacking players. Yet he struggled to get a lot of touches himself. So yeah, I think when the managerial change happened, it didn't have the desired effect, and CSKA just slumped. But as I said earlier, I won't attribute that to Rondon. I think there were issues going on behind the scenes at CSKA, which and they're in a turbulent situation. And Norwich himself has actually been replaced, and they're under a new manager now. So you can kind of highlight there from all that how much turbulence there's been.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned there that you don't think he was being utilised properly. So after that change of management, how would what is the best way that you'd say to utilise Rondon, and why was it going wrong after Olic came in? So what is the most effective role basically that you think he can play?
There were some times I saw under Goncharenko, and only very briefly under Olic. I think he was mainly badly used under Olic. But under Goncharenko, there were some times when, yes, this guy were getting the ball forward to him. There was one particular. Obviously, he's got a good height of 6'1". He's got quite a stocky frame. He's a classic target man striker. In the early parts of his CSKA career under Goncharenko, he was proving very useful. It was sometimes involved in, he sometimes ended up coming deep to get the ball before shielding it, protecting it, laying it off to an advanced player on either flank, or the central attacking midfielder who played behind him in a 4-2-3-1 formation. It was actually former Toffee, Nikola Vlasic,
Oh yeah.
who he seemed to link quite well with. And in addition to this dropping deep to link up play sometimes with the advanced midfielders, he was often also seen getting into the penalty box. Increasingly at this time, CSKA also turned to the Nigerian winger Chidari Ajuke, in addition to fullbacks overlapping on either flank to put crosses in the box for Rondon. With his height, he's a good header of the ball. There's a couple of chances I was watching earlier of him involved. One chance he had in one game where he had a close range header and the keeper pulled off a brilliant save to stop him scoring. So he is good with those close range headers in the box. And there was one particular highlight of his time at CSKA was a goal he scored in a 3-2 defeat to Zenit at home. It actually was Goncharenko's final game in charge. It was some good wing play by the aforementioned winger Chidari Ajuke. He jinked past Zenit's defenders on the wing, sent over a mid-height cross into the box and the byline, and Rondon just neatly escaped his marker in the box and then with a stooping header scored. Classic centre-forward play. So yeah, he can drop deep and link up play like he was doing sometimes. He's also useful in the box. If you can get crosses into him in the box, he's also a useful player.
Sounds like maybe in a similar mold to Dominic Calvert-Lewin there. He's been known to kind of drop deep, link up the play, then get back into the box, and his heading ability has been fantastic for the past couple of seasons. Okay, that's what Rafa Benitez likes. He's brought in the likes of Andros Townsend to improve our crosses in the box, which we weren't really utilising particularly well. We know how good Calvert-Lewin is in the air, and clearly this is the kind of system that the Benitez is looking to employ if we are if we've signed yet another player. But obviously Rondon is going to have his doubters. As I mentioned at the start, not the most overwhelming signing, especially considering the money we spent the past few years. But what would you say to the Everton fans now that maybe saying that, he's, Rondon's only moved because, Benitez likes him, as he's still got something to offer, basically. Obviously, he's not going to be starting every week. We do have Calvert-Lewin, but from the bench around the training ground, what kind of impact is he now going to have just to basically rest the fears that, Benitez is just bringing in another ex-player, basically?
Well, despite Rondon's spell at CSKA failing under Olic, Thomas, after he replaced Goncharенko at the club, I actually do lay the blame on this for Olic. I certainly don't think it was all on Rondon. Obviously, it's a collective thing, but I think Olic's poor tactics and just generally how unconvincing CSKA looked under his stewardship, I think was the main reason for this. I do actually still think Rondon has something to offer Everton. Now, is he the striker of 3 seasons ago when he noted 11 goals and 7 assists from 32 Premier League matches? As a result of this, he won Newcastle's Player of the Year award. Is he still that level? Arguably, no. However, I don't think he's endured that significant a decline since he was on loan at Newcastle from West Brom before he then headed off to the Chinese Super League. Ultimately, there's a couple of factors here. First and foremost, the signing of Rondon by Everton is a free transfer, and I can't imagine his wages will be extortionately high compared to some who were going to China. And he's obviously come back now and probably will be on probably on a wage cut. I can't imagine his wages will be too high. Not super cheap, but I can't imagine it'll be too high. For zero cost, Everton are getting an experienced striker. He's had 4 past seasons of Premier League football behind him. In each of these seasons, he's waiting with good amount of goals. I think he got 11 goals for Newcastle and 7 assists. I think it was 7 assists. Yeah, he won the Player of the Season too. And he's on 1 season on loan there. I think he got 9, 8, and 7 goals for West Brom in his 3 seasons before that, which, comparing the standard of the side he played in at West Brom and Newcastle to get in and around double figures and on double figures for goals is not a bad record, really, considering obviously you're playing for a club lower down the table, perhaps maybe lack of service sometimes, lesser quality of players. And I actually think this could be a preferable situation to, spending a sizable transfer fee on a young striker who's completely untested at Premier League level. Something like this, it's obviously Dominic Calvert-Lewin now is Everton's firmly number 1 striker in attack. However, I do think Everton clearly needed an extra player in attack, looking in from the outside. I think at the moment, when I was looking, Cenk Tosun's currently injured and he looks to be out of favour too. I think he was out on loan at Besiktas last season, wasn't he? And in the last Premier League match against Brighton, I was looking on Transfermarkt earlier and it seemed like Everton didn't have an out-and-out striker amongst their substitutes, obviously because Moise Kean has now left the club to return to Juventus. So even if he's not going to be a striker, a starter at Everton, because Calvert-Lewin's obviously first choice, I think Rondon should still see plentiful minutes throughout the campaign. Over the course of the season, obviously the Toffees will have 2 domestic cup competitions to play in, as well as midweek Premier League matches. I think Rondon could well see starts for Everton on all those occasions, in addition to being a substitute who can be used to vary up their attack late in matches. Obviously, as you mentioned before, Benitez has worked with Rondon successfully. And I do think it's quite good to have an experienced 31-year-old striker with plentiful Premier League experience and a proven track record playing in England in reserve on the bench, rather than maybe a youngster not quite ready for Premier League football yet, or something like that. If the transfer does flop, given it's only a 2-year deal and a free transfer, it's probably not so much financial damage. So it's a low cost, low risk transfer. Obviously, every transfer, you can't guarantee how they're going to go. There's an element of risk to every kind of transfer deal when that goes on. So I'm unsure how he will do at Goodison for Everton. However, I think if utilised correctly by a coach who he's familiar with from a past spell in the Premier League, he can do a solid, if not a spectacular job, which, given the fee paid for him, I think would be, a decent return. I'd say, yeah, it's obviously at the moment, like you said, Everton at the moment are in, they've obviously had to trim back the spending a bit during the summer. It's an interesting period for the club, isn't it? The next few years, they're moving into the new stadium, which I imagine is a very exciting time for the club. So it's probably a couple of transitional years. And I think it's probably a transitional signing, that 2-3 year length of contract, just like Benitez. And I think, yeah, as a backup striker to Calvert-Lewin, if you can chip in with a decent amount of goals, I think he could still do a decent job if used right. So.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything you said there. Look, spending did have to be cut back. We know that we only spent 1.5 million all summer. I think that low cost, low risk part that you mentioned was the definition of our summer, and Rondon was no different. We clearly needed a backup striker, as you mentioned. After Moise Kean left, we needed depth there if we are going to play with Richarlison out on the left, as he kind of has started to do so this year. And to be honest, okay, the Rondon name doesn't exactly excite many people. I think it's a smart transfer, as you mentioned. I think it makes a lot of sense that now we are getting that experience, and he has worked under Benitez before. Look, he's not going to start every game. We know that, as you mentioned. He's not going to be spectacular, and that's pretty much precisely the reason we're bringing him in. He's going to provide that backup, that experience, and if he does need to be called upon, if Calvert-Lewin picks up an injury later in the season, will he get a few goals? Probably. Is he going to set the world alight? No, but we understood that. Bringing them in. So that is pretty much the end of my questions. If you've got any kind of, I don't know, any concluding thoughts, just behind the transfer, really?
Yeah, I think it's one of those transfers which I can certainly understand Benitez taking a chance on. That's kind of, as you said earlier, has been the theme of Everton's summer, hasn't it? They've obviously brought in Andros Townsend and Demarai Gray. I'm actually quite intrigued to see how Rondon will do. I probably might catch a few of the Everton games in the next couple of weeks. Obviously, quite intrigued to see how to do. The game against QPR seems like the perfect in the League Cup. Seems like the perfect game for Rondon there. You'll probably be resting Calvert-Lewin in that. He's a nice experienced striker to bring off the bench and play in that game. Gives Calvert-Lewin a rest, manages minutes. I think it's that transitional period for Everton at the moment under Benitez, who I think could still do a decent job for them. At the moment, let's say for example, a 7th place finish this season is potentially on the cards. Probably running one of the cup competitions. I think that would be a good season. It's just about getting Everton to that in 2 or 3 years' time, getting Everton to that new stadium. I think that's when maybe you'll be able to attract more fresh investment, that kind of thing. So I think it's a transitional signing, I think, for a transitional era. And I think, like you said, Thomas, I agree with you though. It's a smart piece of business, even if it is, probably not the most eye-catching of transfers, but I do think it's a smart piece of business. And whilst I can't guarantee success, like no transfer, I do hope he does well. I wish him well, because I did like him when he was at Newcastle. Rondon.
Yeah, absolutely. And that pretty much brings me to the end of the video. Before we round up, Richard, thank you very much for coming on. Where can our viewers find you if they want to find out more?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at RichDPike89, at RichDPike89. I do football podcasts for Russian Football News. I'm also doing articles for that site, also for Breaking the Lines. And every Friday we've started doing Twitter Spaces for Breaking the Lines. We're discussing some things like, we've discussed in past weeks the Europa Champions League draw for this season. We'll be discussing other things as well. I won't let on to too much, but we'll be having Twitter Spaces every Friday, so I'll be participating in those. And just catch me online, and just follow my work. There'll be loads of stuff coming out soon.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for coming. Obviously, you mentioned Nikola Vlasic before. He's just moved to West Ham, so maybe not. Maybe I think Everton fans are maybe slightly disappointed about that one. He never quite got his run at the team.
Just want to quickly say about Vlasic. I think the problem with him was that I think he moved to Everton too soon. I can understand why, when a young 19-year-old Croatian guy is suddenly offered a chance to come play in the Premier League, it's an opportunity you're not going to turn down. But I do think he probably would have been better going to CSKA and then come into the Premier League. But obviously, when an opportunity comes to play for a good-sized Premier League club like Everton, if you're a young player from Croatia, you're not going to turn that down. But be interesting to see how he does at West Ham. Obviously, they've paid a lot of money for him. Be interesting to see how he does there. But again, I wish him well, because he was really good at CSKA. He's coming back to the Premier League, I think, an improved player now. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe similar to Rondon when he went to Russia. He kind of came at a time where we were going through managers like there was no tomorrow. It was chaos at the club. Really, we were in relegation form. It really wasn't an ideal play for an ideal atmosphere for a young player. Sorry, and obviously, as you mentioned, there West Ham spent £30 million, so a fair amount of money. But we'll see how he does get on. But that does bring me to the end of the video. Thank you all very much for watching. Be sure to check out the rest of the content down below. Let us know your thoughts as well on the sign of Salomon Rondon. Okay, as we mentioned, not the most exciting, but smart piece of business. Definitely, we have brought him in on a free transfer, 2-year deal. Can't go too wrong. And that pretty much brings me to the end. So thank you very much for watching, and join us next time on the Toffee Blues.